Hi, everybody. We'd like to welcome you to our next installment in the We Are series and get you set up with your screens and technology. We are very excited to have a lesson upcoming on We Are Professional. So if you want to go ahead and make sure that you're all set up, check your audio device. We will not be using the raise hand feature, but we will be accepting questions through Q&A. And we'll get started. All right, everybody, we'd like to welcome you to the Penn State Perks LionSide Chats. Today's presenter is Tish Jepson. Tish Jepson is a coordinator of career services here, and you can read a little bit about her. We're so glad that you could join us. Before we get started, we wanted to share that you should feel free to submit questions throughout the chat today via the Q&A feature. We will not be utilizing the raise hand feature. Once the presentation concludes, we're going to facilitate a discussion with our presenter. Chat will be open for today's session with Tish. But now, without further ado, we are excited to introduce Tish Jepson, our coordinator of career services, presenting for our FYS We Are series, We Are Professional. Tish is ready to go, and I'm going to hand the reins over to you, Tish. Tell us how to be professional.
Thank you, Sonia. I just want to welcome everyone who's participating today. And I know this sounds like a really formal presentation. However, it's something that as early as your first semester as a Penn Stater, you want to think about. And I often start by saying, if you had $100,000 and you were going to invest it in the stock market, what would you do? And most times we think about that and we think, well, I'd probably take a look at what's doing well in the stock market. I would research things, I'd check things out, and then I'd decide what I was going to spend that money on. And I want you to start thinking about your Penn State career as a opportunity to invest in yourself. And so when we talk about what it is to be professional, we're talking about how am I going to invest in myself? How am I going to get to a point when I graduate that I'm going to be the most marketable possible person that I possibly can? Now, some people come to college and they say, well, I'm majoring in things. I'm majoring in a major, or I'm not, maybe I'm undecided right now, but I'm planning on majoring in something so I get a degree. And that's going to be all I need. That's going to be my ticket. And I'm here today to talk about that isn't the ticket, that there's 160 plus majors at Penn State. There's over 24 majors at Berks. And, how do I make that major come alive for me? So how do I do my research into that major and into that career so that I'm really marketable? So we're going to touch on a number of topics today, quite a few actually, that really make up what it is to be a professional. So bear with me. I did ask that we could have the chat open. So my style usually is, when I can see your faces, that I'd ask you questions and have it more interactive. But today, since this is a webinar, I want to make sure that you feel comfortable asking me questions throughout this presentation. So let's start. Action plan. I don't know if you read the Career Weeks that's been published by Career Services, but as the coordinator of Career Services, we operate in a way where you need to get involved and come to us. Unless a faculty member has invited us to class, you're not going to really meet us unless you take advantage of the Career Services office, which is located in Perkins. And right now we're virtual, but we are seeing students every day and offering workshops and activities for you to get involved. So what makes you have an action plan? Why would you have an action plan? Well, what we do know is that research shows that students that know what they want to do with their careers or with their college degrees end up becoming more successful. So if you feel it in your gut, if you decided that you want to do something, you're going to do better in it according to research than if you didn't know what you were going to do. So where does that leave a DUS student? We're not saying that DUS students aren't going to do well, but what we're saying is investing in yourself, learning about those 160 majors, and not separating them from what you will do with your career is really essential to being successful. So this action plan that we're talking about is really coming up with an idea of what you're going to major in, and then taking advantage of the summers and the opportunities that you'd have to network with a big organization, a big college like Penn State, to build a really promising network so that you can get hired. So this action plan starts as early as your first year, as I said a number of times. And the action plan is basically a career is made up of three items. It's made up of your interests. So you come to Penn State with an interest, your skills, hopefully you're developing skills while you're at Penn State, and your values. And a lot of times we don't think about our values, but values are important. So if there was something, a show on about Amish in Manhattan at one point, way back when, and it's really, would you put an Amish person in the center of Manhattan, or would you put a person that's grown up in a city and take them to and live in rurally? Well, I don't know the answer to that, but it doesn't really matter if you do that. However, that is a value. What are your values? What do you care about? Where do you want to be? Do you want to be in a big city? Do you want to be in a rural setting? Do you want to work for a small company? Do you want to work for a large company? Do you want to go on to professional school or graduate school and get some other certifications so that you can work in maybe a hospital setting? So where do you want to be? That's called values. What do you value? And a lot of times we don't think about what we value when we make these decisions to come to college. We don't really think. And so that's when you get a person who graduates and goes, I majored in that major, I liked it, but I really never thought about it that much. I never thought what the job was going to be. And oh, geez, I don't necessarily like it. For instance, I'll give you an example. So you chose to major in hospitality management. In hospitality management, the positions that you may have gotten or may be offered have a lot of evenings and weekends and holidays. And you all of a sudden decided that, geez, I don't like to work evenings, weekends, and holidays. So I either have to find something in the hospitality area that I don't have to work those hours, or I end up having to think, well, maybe hospitality isn't really for me, even though I liked my program. So action plans are extremely important. And unlike high school, where you're told basically what you have to do and when you have to do it, career services never does that. We don't tell you that you have to do anything. But we do know that the students that start to invest in themselves early and take advantage of our resources end up getting great internships and wonderful full-time employment. So I can go through lists of students in my career who have gotten jobs at Google and places like Procter and Gamble and big gas company in Texas. And I can go on and on and on about success stories of students, but the key to those students is that they really got involved. They came in, they talked to my staff or me, they had a plan, they used their summers and their time off properly. They did at least 2 to 3 internships. And by the time they graduated, they were extremely, extremely marketable. So action plans are important. I can't say that enough. So what makes up a professional as far as this whole action plan and what do I do? So one of the things that you can do that we offer is you can do a personality assessment. And that is based on the Myers-Briggs assessment. And maybe some of you have taken it before in high school or have taken it actually in your FYS classes. But a personality assessment gets at your strengths and your weaknesses and who you are. And we offer those assessments. Now, the assessment, I know when I teach, teaching the business program, I have all my juniors take that personality assessment because we use it for interviewing. We want them to understand their strengths and their weaknesses. So let me tell you a story. So I had an engineer walk in my office, majoring in engineer, and he said to me, I just don't understand. I really don't fit. I really like my courses, but all the students that are around me, I just don't feel like I'm like them. And my father's an engineer, and I really like engineering, but I just don't know what it is. So I gave him the Myers-Briggs assessment. He took it and he scored in a way that looks like doesn't look like a traditional engineer. It looks like someone who is much more creative, someone who probably more extroverted than most engineers. Um, and so we talked about careers around engineering that may not be the traditional engineering careers where you sit down and you're designing something. It would be an aspect of engineering that really suited his personality. And he thanked me after he took it. He said, "Wow." He goes, "I had no idea, but that's exactly it. I am just different than my other students that are in my classes, and I'm different than my father. I get it now." But it doesn't mean I have to give up engineering. It just means that as I'm pursuing my career path, my internships, my summer jobs, and the things that I'm going to do to prepare to get ready for my career are going to be a little different than maybe what those other students are going to do. And when he actually started interviewing, he ended up getting into a human resource position, which is personnel, where he was more interactive with the people around him, and he could reach out, and he used his engineering in a whole different way. So that's just one example. There's so many examples of how understanding your strengths and your weaknesses is really important. Let me tell you another story. Sometimes students get in an interview, they'll get a weakness question, like they'll get a strengths question, like, tell me about yourself, tell me your strengths. And it's pretty easy to talk about your strengths, but it's a lot easier if you take an assessment. But then they'll get a question like, tell me, can you give me one of your weaknesses? And they'll say, well, I'm a little bit of a procrastinator. And what does that say to an employer? That procrastination isn't a good thing, is it? So we teach you how to use your weakness. So we would frame it in this way. There was a time that I was working in a team with a group of students, and I tended to put things off and put things off and put things off. And what ended up happening is my part of the team was really lagging. So what I needed to do is I really needed to stop and decide that this is not going to be isn't fair to the other students, and I really need to change this behavior. So instead of broadly saying I'm a procrastinator, that student gave a small example of one time when they had been in a situation where they procrastinated and that they flipped it into something positive. They learned how to not be a procrastinator and to work with other students. So in that case, if they didn't know how to answer a weakness question, they may have answered it in, well, I can tend to be a procrastinator. And that is just something that an employer would not like to hear. So when we talk about this action plan, the first step to an action plan is identifying or understanding the 160 plus majors at Penn State. Then understanding yourself by maybe doing a little research on to take an assessment. There's some other assessments that we use in our office about personality that can be improved through your 4 years. You can always improve your personality or your emotional intelligence. And if you know your emotional intelligence, you can improve it. So if a person is an impulse taker, like a first year student tends to not blow off class and go, hang out with their friends instead, that's something that can be improved if they know that that's a weakness. So by understanding your personality and your strengths and weaknesses and maybe your emotional intelligence, you can then start to build what we call a brand. What is a brand? So if I were walking in the room and in that first couple seconds, you're going to make a split decision about me. You're going to look at me. You might look at how I'm dressed. You might look at my behaviors, like how do I speak, or some of the motions I make. You might make a decision about me for a lot of different reasons. Your brand is, how do you appear to the outside world? How do you appear? So we talk a lot in career services about your professional image, right? How do you prepare yourself and look? So I'll tell you a story. A student came into my office for an interview because we offer companies in the office, and then they interview you, and um, we send you to career fairs. We have to dress professionally. And this young woman had a very, very short white skirt on and a very beautiful white blazer and a very, very revealing white shirt and stiletto heels. So she looked absolutely stunning, and but her brand was showing that she looked like she was ready to go out to a club. She didn't look like she was going to be interviewing with a professional in a professional setting, although she was very beautifully dressed. So your brand is, how do you appear to the outside world? And that can be other things such as what comes out of your mouth. Or do you have, like, if I were sitting here and playing with my hair or twisting, my hands or wringing my hands, those are nonverbal things, but they absolutely impact your brand. So brand is very, very important. And so what we do is we offer, and you're going to see it's coming up in November. And by the way, we have a Canvas Pride, a career services Canvas Pride page that has everything on it, all our events. And there's going to be an etiquette lunch coming up in the beginning of November. So your brand is the way maybe you interview and eat. It might be the way you look. Or do you have a professional suit? Do you have a white shirt on? If you're a male with a white or a blue shirt, and do you have a nice tie on, and it doesn't say something like Bart Simpson on it or something weird? How do you look and how do you act to the employer? Are you using the English language in the proper way? For instance, there's something called Interview Stream, where you can practice interviewing, and that's found on our website, and it tapes you. So it's going to pick up, just like I'm being taped today, it's going to pick up on things like, do you say like, or well. And I don't know if you've heard a speaker speak where every word is they've used that word so many times that it becomes the only thing you hear. Well, that is all part of that professional brand, or how you present yourself. The other thing is, a student came into my office, had a professional suit on, a black suit, a nice tie, crisp shirt. And I looked down at his feet, and he had white socks and soccer flip-flops on. Well, what is he saying to the employer? So if you haven't invested in something as a first year student, start to think about picking up a professional interview suit. The difference between an hourly employee and a professional employee, or is someone that is actually looks the part and actually doesn't, has a resume, a marketable resume, rather than filling out a job application. So you're not going to be filling out a job application for an hourly job. You're going to be submitting a resume. You'll also be submitting a resume for in internships. And remember, just a little bit ago, I talked about how many internships do you need before you graduate? 2 to 3. Well, my major doesn't really require an internship. Oh, or my major says I don't need to do an internship till my junior senior year. I'm saying that as a career person, at least 3 to 4 professional experiences before you graduate. That means you use your summers properly. You use your internships in a way that's going to build a career for yourself, but you in some way use that action plan and you develop opportunities that are going to pay off in the end. So let's talk about marketable resumes. And I always say, as far as presentations, talking about our resume is my least favorite thing to do, but it's so important. Oftentimes, resumes are the first thing that someone will see. Before they even meet you, they'll see your resume. And what makes a marketable resume versus just a chronological resume that I worked at Dick's Sporting Goods and I was a landscaper and I did a babysitting job? What makes a professional marketable resume? And can I have a resume that's marketable as early as my first year? Well, I'm here to tell you that we are really, really good at coming up with a professional marketable resume as early as your first year in college. And so what we do is we forget a lot about high school. We might put a little bit of things that relate to your major. So if you were in a business club in high school and you did something, you had a leadership role, we may put that on the resume, but we're going to really spend some time building this marketable resume. And what we often find is that students don't even know their skills until we start asking them questions. So we might say, well, do you speak 2 languages? Yes, I do. Oh, okay. Have you ever worked in activities that relate to publishing, or have you ever done anything on the web where you were designing a brochure? Oh, yeah, I did that. Have you? What about Microsoft Word, Excel, and spreadsheet? Do you do that? Oh, I mean Excel, Word, and PowerPoint. Have you done that? Yeah, actually, I've done that. Mm, oh, I have done some CAD work or SolidWorks, or and it goes on and on and on. And until we meet you, oftentimes you haven't been able to pick out those marketable skills. So that's important. The other thing that we do in a marketable resume is we talk a lot about relevant experience. And you say, uh-oh, I don't have anything that's relevant. And that's where you're wrong, because what we do is we'll use even a course that you've taken that's relevant to what you want to do, and we'll pull out action words around that, something that you've done in a course that helps to sell you for a particular position. And we'll teach you how to write your topic sentence or your objective statement so that you're building upon that throughout the resume. So there's a lot that can happen around a resume, and we really put it out there that we want you to do that as early as your first year. So I'll stop there and tell you a story. So student comes in my office and he says, I really want to work for Google. Okay, first year student, that's good. Why do you want to work for Google? Well, because I know that you can play basketball at lunch, and I heard that they have really good food there, that some of their food on their Google campus is as good as New York City. Okay. And goes through about 6 or 7 different things. Oh, if you get stressed out, they have a masseuse. And he goes through these things and then finally goes, and I really like IT and I have some skills in that area. And he starts naming some of the programming things he messed around with in high school and whatever. So I help him to put this um, marketable resume together. He gets a internship his first summer out of college, I mean in college, with a local company. The second year he goes up to University Park to the career fair that they have twice a year, and he meets with the Google people, and they offer to fly him out to the West Coast where he interviews and lands an internship. The next year he decides that oh, Cisco's right across the street. I think I'll work for Cisco. So the next year he gets an internship with Cisco because he's networked while he's been out at Google. And the following year he graduates and he interviews with Google, and now he travels the world. This is very, very typical of a student that takes advantage of the resources that Penn State has to offer. So important to make an appointment. You can get all our contact information on the Career Services website, and just make an appointment and we'll start talking to you about how to put together a marketable resume. So when you do this marketable resume, a lot of times students do it in a vacuum instead of pulling maybe an internship posting that's posted somewhere. And I want to stop there and tell you that you don't know this, but you all have an account with Penn State. Your user ID is your ticket to Nittany Lion Careers. And Nittany Lion Careers, I call it the big file cabinet for Penn State. It's a big file cabinet to keep track of all the contacts that we know from every company, organization, agency, and we post it on Nittany Lion. Also, it houses all the resumes that people post on there. So with your account, you can upload your resume. And Nittany Lion Careers is also found on the Career Services homepage. And once you have a marketable resume, you're going to post it on Nittany Lion Careers. Now, why do you want to do that? So say you want to work locally for a local company like Tower Health. Well, we would go into Nittany Lion and we can find who has worked with Penn State from Tower Health. When I say worked with, I mean, have they recruited on campus? Have they come to a career fair? That's our network. So aren't you so lucky to have a college this size? A college this size presents an incredible network, right? So there are over 30,000 contacts on Nittany Lion Careers. 30,000 contacts. So you name the company or organization nationally, and most likely Penn State has touched it in some way and has a network. So we have a built-in network. And I'm going to throw out a statistic. Before COVID, it was 85 to 90% of people get hired through a network. I would gather that it's even more than 85 to 90% of people getting hired now through networks. Really important to build a network. So just applying for a job, submitting a resume is not allowing you to build a network. The way you build networks is by asking questions. So when I go into high schools and I talk to high school students, I say, what is the number one thing I want you to take away from this presentation? And I'll put it out there today. Be inquisitive. So inquisitive, it means ask a lot of questions. To build a network, you're really asking people in the field you're interested in about their interests. How did you become a director of career services? Well, I would tell you a long story, and it would have a lot of twists and turns in it. I was going to go to law school. So how do you build a network? And I can tell you that people have done this to me. Well, how did you get to where you've gotten to? And I've helped other professionals become career directors because they've spent some time networking with me and they tapped into my network since I know lots of other career people. So that's how you start to build a network. Now, if you did that in your last semester, your network would be very small. But if you kept an ongoing list, a spreadsheet, or you even just wrote it down in a notebook when you met someone, the person you met, their contact information, and you kept that ongoing throughout your Penn State career, you're going to have an automatic network when you graduate. I don't care what major you're in. Well, we're talking today about these skills. You don't have to be an engineer. You don't have to be a business student. You don't have to be a scientist. You can be any major on campus, and the idea that you need to have a network follows you. It's very, very important. So far, let's just recap it. We're just talking briefly, but we're talking about an action plan. We've talked about a marketable resume, talked about assessments that you might want to do just to get to understand your strengths and your weaknesses. And we talked about branding and maybe coming to an etiquette lunch. And in the spring, we normally have an etiquette dinner. And the reason I started etiquette dinners and lunches is because I had an employer call me up one time, and I'll tell you the story. This employer called me and said, really liked this student, really was professionally dressed, has a good GPA. I took him out to lunch and he ordered chicken fingers and French fries. And as he's picking them up with his hands, I'm asking him questions and trying to have a conversation with him. And he's eating his chicken fingers and French fries and not really spending much time in conversation, and basically froze during the lunch. Well, he said, have you ever thought of offering an etiquette lunch or dinner? And since then I have, and it really does pay off. So in that setting, that particular student probably shouldn't have ordered finger food, right? That's something that maybe a younger kid would have ordered. Probably should have done his research about that company and been able to ask questions through that lunch. So it wasn't about the food, it was about the interview. It was about asking questions. And wouldn't have known that, and obviously didn't, without maybe attending something like an etiquette dinner or an etiquette lunch. Another student was flown down to Texas for an interview with a big oil company. And she was flown down. There were two other students that were flown from University Park and a couple from Texas that were interviewing at the same time. Now, when she was picked up at the airport, she realized that the person that was driving was a representative of the company, obviously. So she was on her best behavior. When she was sitting in the lobby waiting for her next plan to happen with the other students, the kids from the University Park had their feet up on the chairs and they were talking about bed bugs and goofing around. And the other couple from Texas were doing some similar things, but she was on her best behavior. She actually even engaged the receptionist at the front desk and talked to her briefly. And long story short, after 3 days of these going out to lunches and dinners and whatever and interviewing, she was offered the position. And she believes and was told that she acted so professional throughout that interview that they ended up offering her the position. So this branding and professionalism is extremely, extremely important. So I kind of digressed there. I want to go back to job postings. When you're doing this marketable resume, use a highlighter, underline keywords in that job posting, and make sure that your resume has some of those keywords in the resume. Now, we don't expect you to do this on your own. There is a manual posted on the Career Services Canvas page with sample resumes, but the best way to do any of this is by meeting with one of my staff so that we can really kind of guide you through what is a marketable resume. Another thing is when you meet an employer for the first time, whether it's in a roundtable, on Wednesday, we have a roundtable for IST students. And next week, we have a roundtable for business students. When you meet with an employer, you are going to have a short pitch. They call them elevator pitches, but it's basically knowing yourself well enough to talk about yourself for about 60 seconds. You know, how do you introduce yourself? You give your name, you might tell them your major, what your interests are, why you're interested in their company. That's called a pitch. And that's something that you can practice. And I'll make a point right now that everything we're talking about today is a skill that can be practiced. And the reason you start early is so that you can practice these skills and that you get really good at it so that by the time you're ready to graduate, that you're landing the best of the best opportunity. The other thing I'll stop and say right now is that you want to make sure that the first opportunity out of college is a stretch for you. So if you think that you can, if you have the opportunity to work with something local or to go for that big corporate position right out of college, you always want to take the larger position first. Because once you have that on your resume, it's always easy to go smaller. So one of the mistakes a lot of Penn Staters make is that they choose to do the easy thing. Well, I'll just get that. I'll continue to bartend, or I'll get to that job, or I'll do whatever, instead of taking advantage of the incredible network that Penn State offers. They take something easy, their first job out of college, and then they're kind of always clawing for out of it. It's much easier to take the big job and then to go backwards. So that's really, really important. I just did a presentation with the library, and I think we really underutilized the library. There's researchers in that library that are wonderful. And if we're preparing for an interview, we want to make sure that we know a lot about that company. And so I'm not going to go into a lot of detail today about how to research private and public companies or how to research anything, but I can tell you that Penn State has the resources and the people there, plus the subscriptions to all kinds of stuff that smaller schools might not have this pay to have the subscriptions to, that can help you understand and really make you stand out when you start to interview. So let's talk about this network. And I touched on it. How important is it? It's 90% of all jobs are gotten through a network. So if you have 3 to 4 professional experiences, you're already ahead of the game because you've developed a network. So every time you meet a professional, they have an octopus of connections that you're going to tap in by being in their network. So if you're an RHS major and you've met someone at a local like news story or a place where you've been and you've met a couple of directors and people that you've worked with, that's a built-in network. So those networks really do pay off, and then for future opportunity. The other thing is that Penn State and Career Services doesn't work in a bubble. We're not just for Berks. We work with all the 24 campuses. So we have the luxury of seeing what everyone else is doing in the system, including what University Park is doing. And you as a Penn State Berks student have the opportunity to take advantage of anything that is at University Park. And a lot of our students don't realize that. But if Penn State attracts the largest employers. So there was just a career fair at UP. It was virtual, but there were over 300 companies there, and you're going to get the top companies at those career fairs. And so you have the opportunity to get in front of the largest and the best by being part of this Penn State network. So your networking is being inquisitive. You're going to ask questions. You're going to reach You're going to try to reach as far as you can reach, and you're going to have an action plan to do that. Let's just briefly talk about online presence, your online presence. So I know you know what Facebook is. I know that you know what Instagram is, but what about LinkedIn, which is a professional social media um, network? And a lot of jobs, especially since COVID, are being posted on LinkedIn Jobs. And a network of Penn Staters are out there on LinkedIn. So if you wanted to work at a specific company, you could go onto LinkedIn and see how many Penn Staters work at that particular company. And then that's an automatic network, isn't it? So all of a sudden you have now opened up a network that you might not have thought about. I sometimes get the question, oh, I think I'm going to move to Colorado when I graduate. What do I do? Well, the thing you do first is you contact the local Penn State alumni group. And then you try to attend one of their meetings. But they also oftentimes have a Facebook page, and you tap into that network. Plus, you see that you research, you Google the top employers in the area, and then you look on LinkedIn to see who are the Penn Staters that work at that particular those companies. And maybe you message a couple of those and see where you get with that. So there are ways, Penn State's everywhere. There are ways of building a network, and especially if you have this online presence. Remember, an online presence is just as important as having a brand yourself. So you have to brand yourself online, just like you would brand yourself in person. So it's important to understand how to do a professional profile on LinkedIn, which we can also help you with. I know I'm just rambling because I can't see you, and it's so frustrating when I can't see you, but I do want to, the best part about my job is meeting you individually and talking to you about your goals, and then we come up with a plan together. And that is so much fun. So I'm talking about all these things and rambling on about all these different stories, but what I'm really saying that is what I want to do is meet you, sit down with you, or one of my staff will sit down with you, and we'll come up with a plan together and help you to kind of put all this package together so that you're going to get what you want once you graduate. And if you don't know what you want and you're a DUS student, we are also, I was an academic advisor for years. That's another area that we can talk about. We can help you understand the different majors and how they connect to full-time employment. So we've talked about the resume, we talked about your brand, we talked about how to network. But what we haven't talked about is, okay, I have the interview. So I have a story about a student that came in and he said, I really blew that interview. And I said, well, what did you do? And he said, well, they told me, tell me about yourself. And I didn't know what to say. And so I said, well, what are they really saying? What they're really saying is, how do you fit our environment? How do your skills fit what we want you to do? He goes, oh, is that what they're trying to get at? Yeah, because every time they hire someone, it costs them money. So they're trying to match your skills to their skills. So when they ask you, tell me about yourself, they're not asking for you to just sit and ramble on about your personal life or who you are. They're talking about, how do you meet what we want? So you know what they're interviewing you for. So you need to then develop 2 to 3 stories. And I mean this, stories or examples that you can pull out of your pocket in an interview. Now, there are a number of different ways to interview. You can have a traditional interview right from a resume, fairly easy to interview when someone's asking you about your previous job, or about a club or your leadership as a Lion ambassador. It's pretty easy to answer those questions. But how about if a person is asking you a more difficult behavioral question, such as, tell me a time in your life when you did something you weren't particularly proud of. And one of my students said, and this is a true story, said, well, I was working at Sears and I stole something. And I got this pang of guilt, but I returned it. Now, this is the story or the example he used in his interview. What that question, what you're listening to is what is called a behavioral question, getting at your ethics. So I did say it's expensive for employers to hire you. And this is for full-time work, but it also can be for internships, because internships typically are the stepping stones to full-time employment. So he used that, he thought he was just being honest and that he was a good guy because he gave it back. But no one wants to hire someone that may have a tendency to even think of stealing. So even though he had a 3.8 and he was professionally dressed and could speak quite well and he had a good brand, he kind of blew his whole chance of getting hired because he used that example. So this is something that we want you to practice, and it's called behavioral interviewing. It's based on something called the STAR method: situation, task, action, and result. So when I said that this student should have 2 to 3 stories in his pocket, what I wanted him to do is to come up with a story based on situation, task, action, and result. So he would understand that when he's asked about himself, he could talk about a situation where in a classroom, he worked on a project building a gadget. They were tasked with making this thing turn a wheel, and the actions that he took, how did he take, what actions did he take? And then what was the result? Did it turn the wheel or didn't it? Well, it so happens that the interview that he was interviewing for had needed to have some mechanics go on in that particular manufacturer, and that story was exactly what they were looking for. So situation, task, action, and result is extremely important to get a handle on. And the more you practice it, the more you have 2 to 3 stories in your pocket, you're going to ace the interview for internship and full-time employment. And that is by far one of the most important skills to gain or to have once you graduate from Penn State. And if you do that as early as your first year, you're going to become really good at it. So that when you go to a career fair or you go to one of our round tables where you're meeting with employers, or you're interviewing in an interview with one of our employers, you're going to be able to pull those stories out and talk about those items. So when they're asking you behavioral questions, what are they getting at? What do they want to know? What they really want to know is, what's your makeup? Are you ethical? They can't ask you, there's some illegal things they can't ask you. They can't ask you your ethnic background. They can't ask you your age. They can't ask you your marital status. They can't ask you your religion. So they're going to get you to feel really comfortable, and they're going to ask you some behavioral questions that you may choose to say something personal or to touch on some of those illegal things that they can't ask you. So for instance, if I were interviewing and someone asked me a question, I might not want to talk about, or I wouldn't talk about my children. I just wouldn't. But they may make you feel so comfortable that they will try to engage you and talk about your personal life. Behavioral questioning, again, is a skill, and that's something that we practice and we understand. The other type of interviewing is even more interesting. It's called case interviewing. And case interviewing, they're going to get at, they want to know your analytical problem solving ability. They want to know, because one of the top 5 things that employers want to know, one is, are you a good problem solver? Can you think out of the box? So they may ask you some off the wall question like how many sports cars are in the Penn State Berks parking lots? And you're like, what? I don't know. I've never sat and counted the sports cars in the parking lots. They don't care about how many cars are sports cars in the Penn State Berks parking lot. What they care about is what are you going to do to solve that problem? How are you going to set up that to get to a result? And they don't care about the result. They really want to look at your analytical thought process. So that's case interviewing. Again, something that you can really practice. All right, so we have to recap. We've gone a lot of places today. I do want to touch on, how do you find an internship at Penn State Berks? And how do you find a full-time job? But particularly because we're talking to first-year students, how do you find an internship? Well, an internship is found by first looking up on Nittany Lion Careers, maybe participating in career fairs or in roundtables. But you're going to find those internships postings most of the time. But remember that we keep accurate lists of every place that every student who has ever gone to Penn State Berks, where they've done internships. So we have spreadsheet after spreadsheet of opportunities to help you find those internships. So I'm going to close there. Hopefully we'll have some time for a few questions. And I really want to thank you for listening to this because I know it can seem overwhelming, but what I do want to say is just put your toes in, start early, and it gets easier as you do it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tish. Great stuff. I was feverishly jotting down notes and questions. I'd also like to welcome Dawn Pfeiffer-Wrights, who's here to facilitate our Q&A. So our audience members, please feel free to submit some questions in the meantime. Tish, I'm going to get us started and actually ask you a question about what's currently going on in the world as far as COVID and, meeting virtually with people. How has that impacted our students' experience as they're trying to identify internships and employers?
Okay, that's an excellent question. Well, during the lockdown, it became very evident that a lot of the internships were also being halted. So what has happened now, as things have opened up, employers are starting to hire more interns. And all of our majors, almost all our majors at Berks have an internship component to them. So our students have had to do internships, and we have relied on our network of people that we have established over the years to see if we can still have some of those internships ongoing. So there are internships out there. The best advice is to really meet with us and to look for those with us because things have really slowed down.
Great, awesome. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Tish. We do have a question in the chat or in our Q&A pod, and I encourage our listeners to feel free to continue to put questions into the Q&A pod. So Tish, the question is, do you schedule appointments? And if so, where do you do that? And if you can tell me a website, I can go ahead and put that in the chat for our listeners.
Okay, you can find our contact information, email addresses on the Career Services website, but you also can find us all on the Career Services Canvas Pride page.
Okay.
But we're out there. If you're a person that doesn't like appointments like I am, I'm not a huge appointment person. If you have a question, email me, and I live in my email. I'll answer you. And if I think it requires a longer answer or a time to meet, we'll do that. But I often have just picked up the phone, and if you give me a cell phone number, I'll call you.
That's awesome. Can I throw your email in the chat right now?
Sure, it's PAJ7.
Okay, thank you. Awesome, that's fantastic. One of the things that you mentioned and that I wrote down that I wanted to follow up on is the Canvas Pride. How do we find that on Canvas if I was interested in it with my students?
Sure, it's been published in the Career Week, so if they go into their email and just look in their search engine for Career Weeks, they've gotten one in September, and they just got another one in October. And
Okay.
that has all that information on it.
All right, that's fantastic. So our listeners can hopefully circle back to that. Something else that I wanted to follow up on is the Nittany Lion website where you can put your resume. Could you talk more about that again?
So it's called Nittany Lion Careers, and it's again found on the Career Services website, but it's also there's a posting in Career Weeks and on the Canvas page. But it is the big file cabinet for internships, full-time employment, and the ability to network with employers. So there's over 30,000 employers on there.
Awesome, that's fantastic.
And
Are there other questions
Dawn,
oh, sorry.
excuse me, Dawn, it also, it houses all their resumes. So all they will have to do once they have a marketable resume is just upload it to Nittany Lion.
That's very convenient, and I encourage all of our students that are listening here today to take that time and to start working on the resume and get their account settled. Sonia, did you have something?
Yeah, I actually do. Tish, it was funny once you started talking about branding, how I was thinking about what my brand is, right? Because now that I've aged a little bit more than the majority of our audience members, like I know what my brand is because I've had this time to kind of develop it. But how long does it take for your brand to develop? Like, what should students expect?
They're not going to automatically have a brand as early as their first year, but they're going to work on that throughout their college experience so that they become really marketable once they graduate. So everything that you do that lends itself to getting a full-time job or an internship helps to establish this brand. And every project that you work in or every writing assignment that you do or in your classes help to establish that brand, because those can be used on your resume to make a point. So if you're in a project in a class, we can put that under relevant experience on your resume to talk about who you are and what you've learned. Because nobody expects you as a Penn Stater to come out with the knowledge of everything in that particular career. What they do expect, though, is that you're coming to them with some skills, and that's what they're looking for.
Great. Thank you so much, Tish. That's wonderful advice. And we're going to actually go ahead and wrap up today's chat. So thank you, Tish Jepson, for joining us today and about how important it is to be in our lives to be inquisitive and really make the most of our experience here at Penn State. Thank you also for our audience for joining us today during the chat. As you click out of the webinar, you're going to receive access to a survey. Please fill that out and give us some feedback. It'll only take a few moments. That's going to help us get ideas for future chats as well. If you have any questions, you can always reach out to us and send us an email at our LionSide chat email address. And actually, we do have some more chats that are going to be coming up shortly. We have our We Are Healthy series, and we also have a COVID series talk coming up on a Thursday, October 29th at 7 p.m. Dr. Abdullah Konak will present on simulation models and how they can predict the outcomes of COVID-19 containment measures. So we're going back on the COVID chat series, but we also have our next We Are coming up on Wednesday, October 28th at 12:15. So be sure to come back soon, meet with another faculty, staff, or student from Penn State Berks to share their experiences. And most importantly, stay safe, Berks and beyond. We're signing off until next time. This has been the Penn State Berks LionSide Chat.
All right, thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Take care.